Hello everyone. So, bit of a departure from the norm here. Consider this to be kind of the pilot episode of a possible series that I might do, in which it was suggested to me that, hey, why don't you try to mimic some of the fighting styles of characters from video games? And rather than doing a realism analysis, which other channels do and do better, I wanted to instead just go over the movesets themselves and see what we can infer about, one, what the movesets are made up of, see if there's any actual links between what they do and some historical advice, and two, see what we can infer about the fighter from their movement, because as anyone who's done any stage combat will tell you, that's the more important part. Realism doesn't really work for sake of theatrical presentation because realism doesn't necessarily tell you as much about a fighter as a choreographed series of movements will. So, I'm not going to talk about realism, and I'm not going to repeat, oh, you shouldn't spin over and over and over again, because like I said, other people have done that. So instead, we're just going to go over the basic moveset and talk about some interesting parts. So we're starting off with For Honor, because there's a lot of different characters to go over, and today, for my pilot episode, I'm going to go over two different fighters, starting with the Orochi, and then moving on to the Berserker. So, the Orochi, he uses a katana, so I have my boken here today, and specifically, I think that he is probably one of, if not the best cutter out of all of the For Honor heroes. Now, you could argue that he overemphasizes the cut and puts a little bit too much motion to it. We'll get into that later. But whoever did the mocap for him was doing a really good job. It emphasizes strength in his cut. He emphasizes balance. He has a really good stance. He has good movement with all of his cuts, and probably some of the best executions in the game. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to go through the basics, and then an emote, and then an execution. That's how I'm gonna phrase this. So, first things first. For some reason, they didn't give the Orochi a sheath, so he's basically doing what I'm doing, which is he's going shing, and then shink every time, and cutting the crap out of his hand, but we're not going to worry about that. However, the Orochi is an assassin, which means that he cannot hold a guard to one side or the other. So most of the heroes, they can hold on one side, and then they'll have a left-handed version, and then they'll have a high version. The Orochi, however, because he can't hold a guard, instead has two guards. And I actually really like this for him, because it allows him to be a little more versatile, which I really enjoy. So his positions basically are, he has a very high-tipped Chudan, so normally it'd be a little more out here, and also a little bit more linear. He has a very wide stance, and his tip is a little bit more upright. He can do it left foot or right foot forward, doesn't matter. And when he goes to defend on the left or right, he will move and sink his body into it ever so slightly, so guarding with the long edge on both sides. If he goes left foot forward, again, nothing changes stance-wise. He's very solid, very central. His other stance is going up into Judan. So when you go to attack from high, he will raise up and hold there for a moment. Also, quite a few of his attacks will end up finishing here. This, again, can be done left or right foot forward. It doesn't matter. I really like this because most of the Japanese guards are very centralized, so, mostly focusing here. And so I really like that his guards are solid and central, and that he only moves outside of his body for defense, basically. So it's really cool. I like that detail. But his attacks are where things get a little bit interesting. So his lights are all done one-handed, and then his heavy attacks are done two-handed. So we'll go over the lights first. So he's here in his Chudan. You're going to release with your left hand, and you're going to take a small advancing step forward as you cut fully down, then recover it back to center. So I'll show that from the front. Now his hand kind of hovers right about here, which is good. When I fence Messer or something along those lines, usually if I don't have my hand on my hip, it will hover about here because I'm ready to use it. So that's a really cool detail for him to keep it there ready to grapple. And he is a surprisingly grapply character in his executions. I wish he did more of it when he was fighting. Now, a couple lights chained together, he will advance, and then on his next cut, he will pass forward. That's one of the reasons I really like the Orochi, is he uses passing steps with his cuts, which puts his core into it. So that way he is adding a lot more power, he's adding a lot more stability, and a lot more movement. So two of his lights together look approximately like this. Cut, cut. And again, the hand is staying up here, he sinks his way into it, and then we'll return to guard. Now let's do light, light, heavy. Actually, let's do light, light, light. So again, doesn't matter which side I start off with. If you start left foot forward, then he does a passing step, but I will light, light, light. And on that one, that last light, he leans a little bit into it. Not sure why. It's just a little bit of added emphasis to end his chain. But here's that again. Light, light. And there's that slight lean to it. And then he recovers back, which is quite interesting. Now for his heavies. For his heavies, he does some very, very solid emphasized cuts. So he will bring up, raising up, and he puts his core into it. There's a hard turn. Now, were I to be talking to the Orochi, I would ask him if he feels vulnerable when he finishes, because he is very much bringing his shoulder forward, leaning hard, which is normally something I don't advocate people do, because it leaves you exposed. However, he is one of those fighters, and I'll talk about this again if I ever do Jin from Ghost of Tsushima, which I really want to do, but he's one of those fighters that is emphasizing the kill. All of his cuts are designed to be finishing blows, so he's putting a lot more into it. So, his heavies tend to look like so. And notice again that he's using that passing step footwork. So if he's left foot forward, back to here. Now, his top heavy, same idea. He'll just cut straight down. But all of his cuts have a slight angle to them, and he puts the core into it before returning to central, which is just super cool to see. So now let's look at light, light, heavy, from straight on and from the side. Light, light, heavy. Now from the side. Light, light, heavy. So I actually messed that one up because I didn't give the cue, which is an important thing to know for recreating these, is that they have to show cues, obviously, so that way the player can react. So what I should have done there is I went light, light, he does this and guards himself actually before launching into it, versus what I did is I went light, light, and I just brought it up from behind my shoulder. So I didn't give the cue there, and I didn't defend myself. So this is a little tricky for me at first, because bad habits, other habits I want to do. But it's important to note that for his heavy, he always pretty much preps here, which is pretty good because that's guarding him. So that's a cool detail. It also cues to the player, boom, heavy incoming. Now, let's talk about some of his special strikes. So there's the sideways dodging. There's two dodges basically. There's his wide turning cut, and there's his deflect. So let's look at those. So for his wide turning cut, let me step over a little bit. He's going to step, turn, cut, and return back. So here's that again. Now, I'm not trained in regards to spinning, either theatrically or what have you, so those are pretty sloppy on my part, and doing it on the other side is a little bit confusing, honestly, because if I'm not mistaken, he still does it with one hand, but it always looks like he's cutting out with his left hand, so I don't know if maybe he switches hands when he does it. I couldn't quite figure it out looking at the footage. But there's his spinning attack basically. Note that he stays very low, cuts, and then returns to guard. Now, the other special ones that he will do are, he will drop back into the, classic sort of Aijitsu pose, and he will come forward with 2 different attacks. So he will come forward, step, step, and then he will turn and come in with a cut, which is quite interesting. I'm going to attempt that now. Here, step, cut. Like I said, I'm not particularly good with the spinning and the jumping. Or alternatively, perhaps he is step, and rather than turning back, he is turning forward. I don't know. Either way, that's my best attempt at it. He will also sometimes come with just a normal slice, what have you. Now, on to an emote and an execution. So, emotes, oh wait, we forgot the deflect, duh. Alright, so deflect. This is honestly one of my favorites for him, because what he essentially does is as the cut comes in, he steps wide, covering himself, then will turn and launch a quick thrust under his arm. Now, there's a couple different hand positions I've seen for this underarm thrust. I turned my backhand. You could also turn, your front hand is honestly better if you're doing it on that side, so I could see you changing it. You could do on the outside, doesn't particularly matter. But the cut will come in, he'll slide out, then he will turn his back to the opponent, do that quick thrust, and then return out. So he's got a very triangular type entry, much like what I would do for judo, actually. I really like the wide circular steps that he puts in. And of course it also works on the other side. Boom, here, out, back. So now I'll show that from the side so you can see my handwork a little more clearly. So, parry, turn, stab, out, back. Or alternatively, parry, turn, stab, out, back. It's a super cool motion, and we'll see it again, like I said, if I ever do Ghost of Tsushima. Now we've got all those out of the way, let's go on to emotes and execution. So emotes-wise, when it comes to choosing which ones, because I'm not going to demo them all, but when it comes to choosing what emote or execution to show, I wanted to go for things that show a unique aspect of the fighter, or maybe some bit of characterization, because I think that's really fun. Emotes-wise, he really doesn't have a lot of good ones. I'm sorry, Orochi, you just don't. Now, the one that probably is most used is going to be the twirl. Now, basically what he's doing is he's doing a snake being a pretty common style of twirl. He's doing it slightly differently, and I practiced, but for the life of me I could not figure out how to get it to work exactly right. So as I do mine, I release, I turn, I bring the pommel back, I let my pommel come forward, and then I can either, I think I just figured it out. Anyway, here, boom, yeah. He comes from below. Usually when I finish it, I come from above. So here's just a couple in a row. So I usually come from above versus he's coming from below. Just a different version of the snake. Here's it from the side. Yeah. Because he makes all those little noises. But, so that's a decently cool emote, and don't get me wrong, it looks pretty fun, and it is pretty fun to do. I had a mentor who could do it really, really well, and he'd do it on his free time. I was like, oh, you look so cool. Anyway, the execution I've chosen is going to be his decapitation, one of his decapitation executions, but the one that places them down onto their knees. So I really like this one because, one, it mimics a seppuku, which is cool to see, and two, it shows his emphasis on making a good, solid cut. So, for this one, you've already cut down. You're going to thrust. They sink to their knees. I am going to, sorry, I usually do this one left-handed, so I have to do it this way. Thrust, they sink, release with your right hand, clear, cut. So, here's that again. Boom, thrust, cut. Now, I really like about that one is that, one, it's super cool to see him drag the blade out with this smack, and then he really sets himself down into this cut to make sure he gets all the way through. that's super cool to see. So here's that just a couple times. Thrust, and through, thrust, cut. So, that's pretty much all of his emotes and all the fun stuff he does there. I'd love to revisit these guys, by the way. This is, like I said, the pilot episode, so at some point, maybe when I have more time to dedicate to this or have someone who's willing to do my editing, editing monkey position open, please put things side by side so I can feel bad about myself. But at some point, I will probably revisit these guys if this series takes off and do more side by side comparisons. But as a note, if you want to see someone who really, really is good at this, there's a guy, I don't remember his name, I'll find the video and put it in the description, who did, he did all the Orochi's executions in real life, obviously not actually killing someone, but he did a bang-up job on it, and I highly recommend you go give him some views, so I will put that in the description down below. But now, it's on to the Berserker. So, I really like the Berserker, for one, because he's just got he or she has very interesting fighting style, and I have played around with it here and there in sparring. It's unique, and I mean, as far as fighting with two axes go, not necessarily that illogical, I would say. So for sake of simple, I just have a tomahawk here and my father's Francisca I got for him for Christmas. I will say this definitely is a little more balanced than this guy, but doesn't matter. Anyway, so the thing about the Berserker that's quite interesting is that he does this shift in grip very often, and he uses the axes quite equally. So he also holds the grip a little bit more up than you would expect, so he's not necessarily down on the end all the time. He's a little more in the middle, and the grips are also a little bit longer than these guys. So when you have that central sort of grip, these axes lose a little bit on reach, but they feel a little bit better in the hand. So I find that interesting. So stance-wise, he's again an assassin, which means he has a relatively open guard. When you move into position, usually he's just going to be here, down low, very sort of, whatever, left foot, right foot, doesn't matter. When you move into a guard on a particular side, they will bring one arm across and one arm high, or one arm across and one arm high. Now, like I said, I'm not diving into the realism too much, but as far as positions for fighting with two weapons, this isn't that illogical. You've got a forward weapon, you got a back weapon. It's just fine. One guards your head, the other guards the rest of you. Now, the attacks for lights. Lights are always done with the lead hand, whichever hand that may be. So if I'm here, it's usually going to be whatever direction I attack from. If I'm in a guard, it's going to be the lead hand. And it's just going to be that quick cut. So all I'm doing here is I'm just reaching out and cutting. The reason I think this is, character-wise, is that this sort of attack is meant to hit the head or a hand or something along those lines. It's very quick, very out of danger once again. And if I'm in the other way, same idea, just different hand. Here it can be here or here. Doesn't particularly matter. Now, where it gets interesting is the fact that he has a chain. So, unlike the Orochi, who has a set amount of attacks and then they're done, he has an infinite chain. So what this turns into is it turns into light, heavy, light, heavy. And basically you just row from side to side. So here's about what that looks like. And I should also point out that he is also using passing step type footwork, usually, or small little advances. So, here's a little bit of that. Hang on a second. Make sure these don't go flying out of my hand, or I'll end up doing one of the emotes I don't want to do. But we're here, light, heavy, light, heavy. And we're just back to here. And just keep that going infinitely. Now, the heavy attacks can look a little bit different. It's always going to be done with the backhand. So, if I'm here, it's going to be that guy. Over here, that guy. If I'm neutral, it's going to be whatever side is dictated. And sometimes these move together, like so. But 3 heavies in a chain turn it into a particularly fun little kind of whirlwindy one, which can look one of 2 ways. So that goes heavy, spin, heavy, and then on your last one you either do a leap or you do a turning leap. So here we are, heavy, heavy, heavy. So the leap at the end can look either like I just did, up, down, or it can be both. I don't particularly like doing the back spinny one, but I will do it again from the side just to show. But I much prefer just a straight up leap. So here's the chain, heavy, heavy, heavy. And like I said, I even lost my balance there. Now, we're actually trying to go for somebody. Maybe I'd be a little more balanced. I don't know. Somebody volunteer for me to attack them. But here's the other version where I don't have to spin on the last jump. Heavy, heavy, heavy. And on that one, when he finishes his second heavy, it's going to be the other hand that raises. So there's a bit of a boom, cross attack sort of thing going on. Because that's what the Berserker's all about. Mixing up and changing things. Now, just like with the Orochi, we have our side dodges. So we have that guy, and then we have this guy. And the more I do this, the more it feels a little more natural. I don't feel particularly safe, but I feel a little more natural. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Just turn out, cut with whatever's the closest hand, get back out of there. Same idea here, turn out, cut with the closest hand, get out of there. Self-explanatory. Berserker also has over the tops and the leaping attack, as well as deflect. So deflect's pretty much the same as the Orochi, just whichever hand is on the side that you're defending is going to be the one that you protect. So in comes attack, and we're into the guard break. Now, reminds me I missed something, so we'll have to backtrack a little bit here in a minute, but next attack is going to be the leaping attack, or the over the top. So sometimes light, heavy, double heavy. I don't particularly like doing that one because my knees feel dangerous, but light, heavy, heavy. You will also sometimes see that guy, don't like doing it. Or there'll also be just the general running attack, which is pretty much the same as the end of the heavy chain that we did before. Now, something I want to talk about that I forgot to talk about the Orochi, so I will pick up the Boken again and do it in a second, is the parry. So, for the Berserker, the way he parries is with both axes in conjunction, and usually what he's doing is he's catching it underneath the axe head, and then the other one is a little bit back to reinforce. So, boom, slips out of your hand. What do you expect? Anyway. So boom, slide, cut, or boom, slide, cut. Pretty standard parry riposte stuff, really. You have to clean you later. But, real quick, I'll set these down, and I'll do the Orochi's parry. Orochi, Orochi. One of these days I'll decide on a pronunciation. So, forgot to mention this earlier, but when the Orochi parries, he will meet it, defending with the strong, expel, and then launch into whatever cut he's going to launch into. Sometimes he'll do it on this side, sometimes he'll do it cross hands. I can tell you from personal experience, this side, where the hands are open, is much stronger than cross hands. Cross hands lends you into your more natural cuts, but this is much stronger. So the way the Orochi parries, he'll catch, expel, he's expelling with that tip extension, boom, slice, and then whatever he's gonna do. Okay, back to the Berserker. let's talk about emotes and executions. So the ones I chose for the Berserker, because Berserker has some really interesting ones. It's a little bit out of character, I would say. I think the Raider and the Berserker should have been switched, because honestly, the Berserker fights with a lot more skill and sort of fight thinking than the Raider does. The Raider is much more just hit with axe, move on, versus the Berserker shows some surprising tact. And that's why I chose specifically the boxing style emotes. So the Berserker has a boxing emote and has a boxing execution, in which all he does is he's doing what I'm doing right now. He chokes up and punches. So first, the show off emote. So you're just standing around, it's gonna be jab, 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 cross, hook, uppercut. So here's that again, staying around. Or from the side. That's his cool emote, and I like it because in general it's a good combo, you know, jab. And I will point out he is moving forward on his jabs as well. So he's not just extending, he's going 1, 2, 3, cross, nice good hip turn, hook, and he holds it sideways when he hooks, as opposed to turning it this way, as I would with normal. Hook, uppercut. And the uppercut, he again turns it in. You could also just jab straight. Here's it from the other side. 1, 2, 3, cross, hook, uppercut. So that's his emote. Now let's look at his execution. I really like this execution because it involves 2 voids as well, so it's just fun. But you land the hit, and then you come out. The opponent is going to come with a wild haymaker from your left. You're going to void back as you slide these guys in. Weave, kidney, liver, uppercut, hard cross. So here's that again. So we're here, boom, just landed my hit, rip out, whoa. Here's that from the side. Land, rip out, whoa. And one more time from this side. In, rip. And there we go. That's the Berserker. Like I said, there's a lot of more emotes and executions for both heroes, and I would love to have side-by-side comparison with all that fancy editing. I'm not any good at editing, so maybe at some point I will make that happen. But otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Like I said, the goal wasn't really to go over realism, because other channels have done that, and they're better at it. And you know, I don't want to be repeating the same thing. So instead, I just wanted to go over the movesets and see what it shows about the fighter. And you know, when you start recognizing these individual pieces, maybe you learn a little bit more about them and appreciate their characterization, you know? So, otherwise though, this is just kind of the pilot episode of my, I don't even have a name for it, but other things I want to cover are, of course, other heroes from For Honor. I would love to cover other things, like, for example, I was thinking of doing Haytham Kenway versus Connor Kenway in regards to the way they use the sword in Assassin's Creed 3. I'd love to do Jin from Ghost of Tsushima. I'll need to practice a lot for that one. But otherwise, if you enjoyed this, let me know. If you got any suggestions for characters, let me know. And thank you very much. We'll go over some historical and fantasy stuff another time.